Hello everyone, and welcome back to Little Nightmare. I'm Michael, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Please subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they're essential for helping the channel grow and allowing me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit. Get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let's dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. The first thing Alex noticed, before the silence and the smell of wet pine and cold iron, was that the clock on the dashboard had stopped. It was a cheap digital thing, the numbers a faint, sickly red, and it was frozen at 3:17 a.m. He tapped the plastic casing with a grimy fingernail, but the numbers refused to change. He had been driving for what felt like days, fleeing the fluorescent-lit ruin of his life in the city, and this final stretch of mountain road had been a black tunnel through an endless night. He'd been watching that clock, counting down the minutes until a dawn that seemed perpetually stuck at the edge of the sky. A promise never fulfilled. Now, even time had given up. He pulled the old station wagon over onto the gravel shoulder, the crunch of tires unnaturally loud in the absolute stillness. The engine ticked as it cooled. He got out, the mountain air sharp and clean in his lungs, and looked up. The stars were a furious, icy spray, far too many and far too bright, and the moon was a thin, bone-white sliver that cast no real light, only carved deeper shadows into the landscape. He was somewhere in the remote reaches of the Cascades, a place his great-uncle's will had insisted he visit, a final cryptic demand from a man he'd met only once as a child. The town was called Stillwater. According to the map, it was just a few miles ahead. He walked to the front of the car and stared at the broken yellow line of the road, vanishing into a wall of black trees. A sound reached him then, not from the woods, but from the air itself. A low, resonant hum, so deep it was felt more than heard. A vibration in the teeth and the bones of the inner ear. It was the sound of a sleeping giant, the earth itself dreaming a bad dream. It made the silence around it feel brittle, like a thin sheet of ice over deep water. The town of Stillwater was less a town and more a collection of structures clinging to the side of a mountain, huddled around a lake so dark and still it looked like a hole punched through the world. The water was a sheet of polished obsidian reflecting nothing, not the grim sky nor the skeletal pines along its shore. The buildings were old, wood gone silver with age, roofs sagging like the backs of tired animals. There were no streetlights, and the few windows that showed any light did so with a weak, yellowish glow, as if the bulbs inside were old and dying. The general store was the only place that seemed open. A bell above the door jangled a dissonant note when Alex entered. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, cured meat, and something else, something sweetly chemical, like antiseptic and spoiled fruit. A man with a face like a clenched fist stood behind the counter, polishing a glass with a rag that looked none too clean. He didn't look up. "I'm looking for Clark," Alex said, his voice too loud in the cramped space. "Lena Clark. She was my great-uncle's lawyer." The man behind the counter stopped polishing. He looked at Alex with flat, expressionless eyes. "Ain't no lawyers in Stillwater, just us. She handled Elias Vance's estate. I'm Alex Vance. He left me his property here." A subtle shift occurred in the room. The man's stillness became something more profound, a predatory patience. From the shadows at the back of the store, another figure emerged, an older woman, with hair the color of steel wool, and a gaze that felt like a physical weight. "Elias's boy," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "We heard you might come. I just need the keys and the paperwork," Alex said, the hum from the mountains now a constant pressure in his skull. "I'm not staying long." The woman smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of lips. "No one ever does." Lena's place is up the old quarry road. The White House at the end. Don't mind the dogs. None. The quarry road was little more than a dirt track, riddled with potholes that gleamed with stagnant water. The forest pressed in close here, the branches scraping against the sides of the car like bony fingers. The White House was a 2-story Victorian, its paint peeling, its windows dark. It stood at the edge of a vast, abandoned quarry, a great gouge in the earth that dropped away into profound darkness. The air here was different, colder. The chemical smell was stronger, undercut with the cloying scent of decay. Lena Clark was a tall, severe woman dressed in a lab coat that was too white, too clean for this place. She opened the door before Alex could knock, as if she had been waiting for him. Her handshake was firm and cold. "Alexander, your uncle spoke of you," she said, leading him into a front parlor that was a museum of old furniture and older dust. There were no personal touches, no photographs. On a large oak desk, however, sat a sleek, modern microscope and several trays of glass slides. He was a brilliant man, a visionary. "I barely knew him," Alex admitted, his eyes drifting to the window, to the yawning blackness of the quarry. "He was a recluse," my mother said. "He understood the potential of this place," Clark said, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. She handed him a heavy iron key. The property is yours. The house, the land, the quarry. There are conditions, of course, in the will. You cannot sell it. You cannot allow it to be surveyed or excavated by any outside agency. Why would I? It's a hole in the ground. Clark's smile was a clinical thing. It is a unique ecosystem, your uncle's life's work. He believed the quartz deposits here possessed anomalous properties, a resonant frequency that can influence biological matter. Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The hum seemed to intensify, throbbing at the base of his spine. He thought of the stories his mother had whispered, late at night when she'd had too much wine. Stories of Uncle Elias, the family eccentric, who talked about singing stones and shaping the clay of life. That night, alone in his great-uncle's house, the nightmares began. They were not dreams of monsters, but of wrongness. He dreamed the walls were breathing, the floorboards pulsing with a slow, viscous rhythm. He dreamed of the lake, not of water, but of a thick, dark fluid that held shapes within it, things that were almost human but twisted, their limbs bent at impossible angles, their mouths open in silent, endless screams. He woke gasping, the chemical smell so strong in his nostrils he could taste it on his tongue. The next day, he explored the quarry. The path down was treacherous, littered with rusted machinery and shattered rock. The deeper he went, the stranger the vegetation became. The moss was a lurid electric green, growing in thick, pulsing mats. Fungi grew in spiraling, brain-like clusters, weeping a clear, syrupy fluid. And there were the flies. They were large, with iridescent blue bodies, and they did not buzz. They hummed, a perfect, tiny echo of the great sound that filled the valley. He found the first of them near a stagnant pool at the quarry's bottom. It was a rabbit, or what had been one. Its fur was patchy, revealing skin that was lumpy and gray, like concrete. One of its eyes was huge and multifaceted, a glistening black orb. The other was a normal, terrified rabbit's eye. It twitched, its back legs kicking in a pathetic, broken rhythm, and from its throat came not a squeal, but a wet, gurgling approximation of the pervasive hum. Alex stumbled back, his stomach heaving. This was no random mutation. This was craftsmanship. Ugly, blasphemous craftsmanship. He ran back to town, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst into the general store, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. The man with the clenched fist face listened, his expression unchanging. The old woman from the shadows emerged again. "The quarry is a sick place," she said, her voice devoid of concern. "Always has been. Animals go down there, they don't come out right. You should stay away from it." "That wasn't just not right," Alex shouted, his fear turning to anger. It was made. Someone is doing this." The woman's eyes hardened. "Elias did his work. Now Lena does hers. It's for the best. It keeps the peace." "Keeps what peace?" Alex demanded, but they would not answer. They just looked at him with that same flat, knowing silence. He saw it then in their eyes, not malice, but a kind of weary acceptance, a resignation to a horror so vast and so permanent that fighting it was unthinkable. He went to the town's tiny library, a single room in a converted shed. The records were sparse, but he found mentions of his uncle, Elias Vance, geologist and biologist. Grants from obscure foundations. A single, brief newspaper clipping from 30 years ago, reporting the disappearance of a hiker. Then another, 5 years later. And another. The librarian. A young woman with tired eyes and a nervous tremor in her hands, quickly took the old ledger from him. "That's old history," she whispered, her gaze darting towards the door. "No one talks about that. It upsets the balance." "What balance?" Alex asked, his voice soft, conspiratorial. She leaned closer, the smell of her breath a mix of mint and fear. "The hum. It's in everything here. The water, the rocks, the air. It smooths things out, makes things quiet. But the quarry, it's the source. It's too strong. It doesn't smooth. It changes." She looked at him with a sudden desperate pity. "You have his face. You should leave before she adds you to her collection." Alex left the library, the world tilting around him. The picturesque mountain town was a lie, a thin veneer over something monstrous. The locals weren't just hiding a secret. They were living within it, part of its ecosystem. Lena Clark wasn't just a lawyer. She was a curator, a scientist continuing her predecessor's terrible work. The mutations weren't an accident. They were the point. He waited until full dark, the bone-white sliver of moon offering little light. He took a flashlight and a tire iron from the station wagon and headed back towards Clark's house. He didn't go to the front door. He circled around back, towards a low, concrete block structure he had assumed was a tool shed. It had no windows, and a heavy modern padlock secured the door. The lock broke easily under the leverage of the tire iron, the sound of snapping metal obscenely loud. He pulled the door open, and the smell that rolled out was a physical blow. It was the chemical sweetness, amplified 1,000 times, mixed with the ripe, meaty stench of a slaughterhouse. He raised his flashlight, his hand trembling. The shed was a laboratory. Stainless steel tables were cluttered with beakers, microscopes, and surgical tools. Jars lined shelves, filled with things floating in clear preservative. A dog with an extra limb growing from its shoulder. A bird with a scaled, serpentine tail. A human hand, pale and delicate, its fingers fused together into a fleshy paddle. And in the center of the room, connected to a web of tubes and wires, was a large glass tank. Inside, suspended in a bubbling amber fluid, was a creature. It was vaguely humanoid, its skin a mottled gray and pink, hairless. Its face was a nightmare of asymmetry. One eye wide and blue, the other a tiny pinprick black dot. Its mouth was a lipless gash, and as the bubbles rose around it, the gash opened and closed, and the low, resonant hum of the valley issued forth, purified and amplified. He called it the choir. Alex spun around. Lena Clark stood in the doorway, holding a heavy pistol, her expression one of cool, academic interest. She didn't seem angry, only disappointed. "Elias was a poet," she continued, stepping into the room. Her lab coat was pristine, He didn't see this as horror. He saw it as music. The quartz in the quarry resonates at a specific frequency, Alexander. A song that rewrites the very code of life. It breaks it down, makes it malleable. Most people, their bodies can't hold the tune. They come apart. They become messy. She gestured dismissively at the jars. But some, the strong ones, they adapt. They become part of the symphony. The hikers, Alex whispered, his eyes locked on the thing in the tank. Sacrifices to a greater understanding, Clark corrected. Your uncle believed we could guide the process, create a new, more perfect form of life, one in harmony with the Earth's own frequency. I have simply refined his methods. The town, they understand. The hum keeps them docile. It smooths the edges of their fear. In return, they look the other way. They provide the raw materials when needed. You're insane. I am a realist, she said, raising the pistol. You have your uncle's genetic material, a certain resilience. I was hoping you would come, a fresh subject, a strong one. The choir is always hungry for new voices. She moved with a sudden, shocking speed. The gun flashed. A searing pain erupted in Alex's shoulder. He cried out, dropping the flashlight. The room plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint phosphorescent glow from the tank. He scrambled backwards, his hand closing around the cold steel of the tire iron. He heard her footsteps, calm and measured. There is no point in fighting, Alexander. It is the most natural thing in the world. It is the world here. It is the song of this place. He swung the tire iron blindly in the dark. It connected with something solid, with a sickening crunch. Clark grunted, but didn't cry out. He swung again, and this time he heard the gun clatter to the concrete floor. He lunged forward, tackling her, his injured shoulder screaming in protest. They fell against one of the steel tables, sending jars of specimens shattering on the floor. The sweet, rotten smell intensified. He was stronger, fueled by a pure animal terror. He pinned her, his hands finding her throat. In the dim, eerie light from the tank, he saw her face. She wasn't afraid. She was fascinated. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the thing in the tank, which was now stirring, its movements agitated. Listen, she gurgled, her throat constricting under his grip. It's changing its song. For you. The hum shifted. The deep, resonant tone fractured into a screeching, discordant wail that felt like needles being driven into his eardrums. The glass of the tank began to crack, a spider web of lines spreading from within. The amber fluid started to leak out, sizzling as it hit the floor. Alex released her and stumbled back. Clark crawled towards the tank, a devotee reaching for her god. Yes, yes. The tank exploded. Shards of glass and a wave of the viscous, bubbling fluid drenched the room. The creature, freed, slumped onto the floor. It was not a mighty beast. It was a pathetic, twitching thing, its malformed body unable to support itself. It lifted its head, the lipless gash working, and the screeching wail turned into a sound of pure, infantile distress. Clark reached for it, crooning, and then the thing, in its blind, pathetic flailing, wrapped a long, pale arm around her neck. It was not an attack of malice, but of desperate, clumsy need. It held on, and Clark's eyes bulged, not with terror, but with a kind of ecstatic surprise as the pressure tightened, and the brittle bones in her neck snapped with a sound like stepping on a dry twig. Alex ran. He ran out of the shed, past the White House, and into the woods. He didn't look back. The discordant wail followed him, echoing through the trees, a sound that was now the true voice of Stillwater. He made it to his car, his shoulder bleeding, his clothes soaked in the chemical-smelling fluid. He turned the key, and with a sob of relief, the engine roared to life. He sped down the mountain road. The first faint hints of dawn, finally, truly, staining the eastern sky. He didn't stop until he was 50 miles away, at a gas station with bright lights and a working payphone. He called the state police, babbling about a mad scientist, about mutations, about a town of accomplices. They listened with professional patience and told him to wait. When they arrived, their faces were grim. They took his statement. They asked for the location. Then two of them went to their cruiser to radio it in. Alex watched through the grimy window of the gas station. He saw the officer on the radio pause. He saw him listen. Then he saw him nod, his expression shifting from professional concern to a flat, familiar blindness. He came back inside. "There's no town called Stillwater on any of our maps, son," the officer said, his voice calm, too calm. "That whole area was evacuated and condemned 30 years ago. A chemical spill from an abandoned mining operation. Nothing lives up there. You must have gotten lost, had a bad dream. You're bleeding. Let's get you to a hospital." They were lying. He saw it in their eyes. The same weary resignation. The same flat acceptance. The hum had its long-range receivers, too. Its influence was wider than he had ever imagined. They released him from the hospital 2 days later. His story of mutated creatures and a murderous scientist was officially recorded as a hallucination brought on by blood loss and exposure. He tried to tell a reporter, who listened with a cynical smile and then wrote a small piece about the dangers of hiking alone. The world had a way of sanding down the sharp, jagged edges of the truth, of making the unbelievable seem merely improbable. Then, unlikely, then forgotten. He moved to a small city, got a job, tried to rebuild the life he had fled. But the world had lost its solidity. He would hear the low drone of a distant airplane or the hum of a refrigerator, and his heart would clench. His skin would grow cold. He started sleeping with the lights on. The face of the thing in the tank, that pathetic, monstrous homunculus, was the last thing he saw before sleep took him, and the first thing he saw when he woke. He spent his days in libraries, searching for any mention of Elias Vance, Lena Clark, or Stillwater. He found nothing. It was as if the place had been meticulously scrubbed from the record, a tumor excised from the body of history. One afternoon, in a dusty archive of defunct scientific journals, he found it. A single, offhand reference in a geology paper from 1952. It mentioned an anomalous acoustic resonance detected in a remote region of the Cascades, a sound that appeared to have minor mutagenic effects on local fauna. The author of the paper was a young graduate student named Elias Vance. It was all that was left. A single, dry academic footnote. He closed the journal, the brittle pages whispering like dead leaves. He walked out into the bland, sunlit afternoon, the sounds of traffic and normal life, a meaningless roar in his ears. He was a ghost, haunting a world that refused to see the cracks in its own foundation. He knew with a certainty that was colder than ice, that he would never be free. The song was still playing, and he was the only one who could hear it. A discordant note that would never resolve, a stain on the edge of his vision, a hum in the marrow of his bones that would not fade, that would not fade, that would not fade. And the clock on his nightstand, a cheap digital thing, was forever frozen at 3:17 a.m. The frozen numbers were the only constant in his life now. He would wake in the sweat-soaked dark, his eyes snapping to the dim red glow. 3:17. It didn't matter if he went to bed at midnight or at 10. He always awoke at that same moment. His body jolted from sleep by a silent alarm, tuned to a frequency only he could perceive. He had thrown the clock away twice. The first time he found it the next morning on his doorstep, the display unchanged. The second time, it was in his kitchen sink, resting in a shallow pool of water that smelled faintly of chemicals. He stopped trying after that. He lost his job. The constant fatigue made him slow and irritable. His coworkers avoided him, unnerved by the way he would sometimes freeze, his head cocked as if listening to something they could not hear. He took to walking the city at night, a solitary figure pacing the grid of sidewalks under the orange glare of the streetlights. He was searching for something, though he did not know what. A crack in the pavement that hummed. A stray cat with too many eyes. A sign that the sickness was not confined to that forgotten valley. One rainy Tuesday, he found it. Or it found him. He was in a laundromat, watching his clothes tumble in a slow, mindless circle. The place was empty save for an old man sleeping in a plastic chair in the corner. The air was thick with the smell of cheap detergent and warm, damp cotton. And then, underneath it all, he caught the scent. A cloying chemical sweetness. His head snapped up. His heart began to hammer. It was coming from the industrial-sized dryer at the end of the row. He walked towards it, his steps slow and deliberate. The round window of the dryer was fogged with condensation. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. Inside, tumbling with a load of dark work clothes, was a single, smooth, gray stone. It was about the size of his fist, and it was unmistakably quartz. As it turned over and over in the hot, violent air, he saw a faint, internal pulse of light. A slow, rhythmic beat like a diseased heart. He stumbled back, a cry caught in his throat. The old man in the corner snored on. Alex fled the laundromat, leaving his wet clothes spinning behind him. He knew then that he was not haunted by a memory. He was being hunted. The thing in the quarry, or the intelligence behind it, had followed him. It was testing him. It was reminding him that there was no outside, no escape. The song was the world, and the world was its instrument. He went back to his apartment and locked the door, pushing a chair under the knob. He sat on the floor in the dark, his back against the wall, and waited. The hum was louder now, a constant vibrating pressure in his skull. He could feel it in his teeth. He looked at his hands, half expecting to see the skin begin to gray and harden, his fingers to slowly fuse together. The knock on his door came just after midnight. It was not a loud, demanding knock. It was a soft, polite tap. Tap. Pa-do-boom. Tap. Dot. Tap. Dot-ow. He did not move. He held his breath. The tapping stopped. Then he heard a new sound. A faint, sibilant whispering from the other side of the door. It was not one voice, but many. Layered over one another, a chorus of dry, papery sounds. He could not make out words, but the rhythm was familiar. It was the rhythm of the hum. He knew he should stay quiet. He should wait for it to go away. But a terrible, morbid curiosity seized him. A need to see the face of the thing that had ruined his life. He rose slowly, his joints aching, and crept to the door. He leaned forward, pressing his eye to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. He felt a wave of confused relief. Then he looked down. There, on the worn hallway carpet, just in front of his door, was a small, neat pile of objects. A dead bird, its feathers matted, and its beak twisted to the side. A child's plastic toy, a soldier whose limbs had been melted and reformed into a single blobby mass. And in the center of the pile, resting on a clean white handkerchief, was another piece of quartz. This one was smaller, and it pulsed with a brighter, more urgent light. He understood the message. It was not a threat of death. It was a promise of inclusion. He was being invited to join the choir. His resistance, his unique ability to hear the song without being broken or pacified by it, made him valuable. He was being offered a choice. Be smoothed out into docility like the townsfolk and the police, or be reshaped, remade into a new and terrible form. He sank to the floor, his head in his hands. The humming was inside him now, a part of his nervous system, a second pulse. He knew he could not stay here. He was a beacon, drawing these things to him, putting everyone around him in danger. There was only one place left to go, one source of the sickness. He had to go back. He had to go back to the quarry. It was the only note left in the song, the only place his story could possibly end. He looked at the clock. 3:17. It was time to go. He packed a bag with things that felt absurdly normal. A bottle of water, a flashlight with fresh batteries, a knife from his kitchen drawer. Each item was a tiny anchor to a world that no longer felt real. He left the apartment just as the sky began to lighten, not with the hope of dawn, but with the grim acceptance of a condemned man walking to the gallows. He did not look back. He left the clock on the floor, its red numbers a silent accusation. He drove for 2 days, stopping only for gas, paying with crumpled cash, avoiding the eyes of the attendants. The closer he got to the mountains, the louder the hum became. It was no longer just a sound. It was a physical pressure, a vibration that made the fillings in his teeth ache and the car's steering wheel feel alive in his hands. The green of the pine trees began to look sickly, the sunlight thin and inadequate. He abandoned the car where the paved road turned to gravel, just as he had on his first trip. The air was still and cold. He started walking, the bag heavy on his back. The town of Stillwater was exactly as he had left it, yet profoundly different. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, no distant sound of a radio. The houses looked more weathered, as if years had passed in the span of months. Windows were dark. Doors stood ajar. He saw no one. He walked through the empty streets, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. He felt eyes on him but saw no movement behind the dusty windows. He made his way to the edge of town, to the path that led up to the old quarry. The chemical smell was stronger here, a thick, sweet miasma that clung to the back of his throat. The hum was a solid wall of sound now, a deep, resonant chord that seemed to be coming from the earth itself. The quarry opened before him, a great, gray wound in the mountain. The exposed rock face glittered in the weak sunlight, a vast mosaic of crystalline quartz, and in the center of the quarry floor, something new had grown. It was a structure, or perhaps a formation made of the same gray stone. It was not built, but looked as if it had been secreted, like a coral reef. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, and from its open, hive-like mouth, the hum emanated, pure and undiluted. Standing before it, arranged in a loose semicircle, were the people of Stillwater. They were motionless, their faces blank, their clothes hanging loosely on their gaunt frames. They were not looking at him. Their heads were tilted up towards the stone formation, their mouths slightly open, as if drinking in the sound. And then he saw the changes. One man had a hand that was slowly, imperceptibly, turning to a smooth, stony texture. A woman had a patch of crystalline growth, spreading from her temple down her neck. They were not finished. They were works in progress. The choir was not just in a tank anymore. It was here, and it was singing its congregation into a new shape. From the midst of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. It was the old librarian. Her eyes, which had once held a flicker of pity, were now solid, glossy black orbs. She did not speak, but a voice formed directly in Alec's mind, a dry rustle of thought that was not his own. "You have returned. The song has waited for you. You are the dissonance that must be resolved." Alex dropped his bag. The knife felt like a toy in his hand. He knew then that fighting was pointless. This was not a battle that could be won with force. It was a negotiation, a terrible final choice. He could join the silent, smoothing chorus and lose himself, or he could hold on to his self and be torn apart by the discord. There was no third option. He took a step forward, then another, walking towards the pulsing stone heart of the quarry. The hum filled him, vibrating in his bones, rewriting the rhythm of his heart. He looked at the stone formation, and for a fleeting second he thought he saw a familiar shape within the swirling crystalline patterns. A face. His uncle's face, serene and absorbed, merged with the stone, its mouth open in an eternal silent note. Alex stopped at the edge of the semicircle. He closed his eyes. He let the knife fall from his hand. He could feel the pressure of the song trying to reshape him, to smooth his sharp, painful memories into the placid acceptance of the chorus. He fought it, clinging to the image of his own face, his own name, the feel of rain on his skin, the memory of a world that was not made of stone and sound. It was a battle fought in absolute stillness. He stood there for a long time, a solitary figure of flesh and blood against the monolithic choir. He did not know if he was winning or losing. He only knew that he was still Alex. And as long as he was, the song was not complete. The dissonance remained. And in that dissonance, in that one small, stubborn note of self, there was a kind of victory. He opened his mouth, not to scream, not to sing, but simply to breathe. The air that entered his lungs was thick with the scent of quartz and change. The breath he drew in was not air. It was the hum-given substance, a dry, crystalline dust that coated his tongue and scraped down his throat. It carried no oxygen, only meaning, a single repeating command: yield. The pressure inside his skull intensified, a vice of pure sound. He felt a strange warmth in his left hand and looked down. The skin on his knuckles was paling, losing its texture, becoming smooth and glassy. It did not hurt. It felt like coming home. A wave of profound peace washed over him, so seductive it made his knees weak. All he had to do was stop fighting. He could let his memories of the world outside, the feel of wind, the taste of coffee, the meaningless chatter of strangers, dissolve into the great, harmonious drop. He would become part of something vast and eternal. No more fear, no more loneliness, just the song. He took another half-step forward, his will crumbling. The faces of the townsfolk remained placid, but he felt their collective attention focus on him, a gentle, welcoming pull. The stone librarian watched, her black eyes absorbing the light. Then a fragment of a memory, sharp and painful as a shard of glass, cut through the lulling drone. It was the sound of the creature in the tank, that final, infantile wail of distress. It was not a sound of the choir. It was a sound of a soul being unmade. It was the truth of this place, hidden beneath the promise of peace. He clenched his jaw, the muscles screaming in protest. He focused on that awful sound, on the memory of Clark's neck snapping, on the terror that had driven him from this place. He clung to the dissonance. He embraced it. "No," he said. The word was a dry croak, barely audible. But it was a foreign object in the pure atmosphere of the quarry. It was a crack in the monolith. The hum changed. The deep, resonant chord gained a new, jagged edge. The welcoming pressure became a crushing weight. The warmth in his hand turned to a sharp, burning pain. He watched, horrified and fascinated, as the glassy transformation on his knuckles halted, then receded, the skin flushing back to a painful, normal pink. He was rejecting the change. His body was fighting the rewrite. The stone formation pulsed faster, the light within it flaring angrily. The semicircle of townsfolk took a synchronized step forward. Their blank expressions did not change, but their intent was clear. If he would not join the chorus willingly, he would be silenced. Alex took a stumbling step back, his eyes darting towards the path he had come down. It seemed 1,000 miles away. There was no escape there. He knew that now. He was trapped in the amplifier of the song itself. His gaze fell upon the quarry walls, the vast sheets of exposed quartz. They were the source, the resonating chamber for the hum. An idea, desperate and insane, formed in his mind. It was not a plan for survival. It was a plan for sabotage. If he could not stop the music, he could break the instrument. He turned and ran, not for the path, but for the base of the quarry wall. The townsfolk moved to intercept him, their movements unnervingly fluid and coordinated. He was faster, fueled by a final, frantic burst of adrenaline. He reached the wall and began to climb, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the sharp, crystalline rock. Shards sliced into his palms, leaving smears of blood that looked impossibly red against the gray stone. The hum was a physical force now, trying to shake him loose. The entire quarry seemed to vibrate, the sound so immense it was beyond hearing. A tremor in reality itself. He climbed higher, 20 feet, then 30. Below, the congregation had gathered at the base, their faces upturned, waiting for him to fall. He found what he was looking for. A massive, protruding ledge of quartz, a key structural element in the resonating wall. It was thicker than his body and pulsed with a deep, steady light. He braced his feet against a lower outcrop and put his back against the ledge. He pushed. Nothing happened. The stone was immovable. He strained until his vision spotted, his muscles burning. It was useless. He was a gnat trying to topple a mountain. A sense of final despair washed over him. This was it. This was where he would be absorbed, or dashed upon the rocks below. He looked down at the patient, waiting faces. He looked at the pulsing heart of the formation. And then he saw it. A fissure, a thin, dark crack running from the base of the ledge he was braced against. It was a flaw, a dissonance in the stone itself. He repositioned himself, ignoring the tearing pain in his shoulders. He focused all his weight, all his remaining strength, on that single narrow crack. He pushed, not with the brute force of his body, but with the focused intent of his will, pouring all his terror, his rage, his refusal into that one weak point. For a second, nothing. Then, a sound that was not the hum cut through the drone. A sharp, high-pitched crack. The fissure widened, spider-webbing outwards with lightning speed. The pulse of light within the ledge stuttered, faltered. The hum wavered. For the first time since he had entered the valley, the perfect monolithic chord broke. It became a discordant shriek, a wail of feedback from a broken speaker. The light in the stone formation flared wildly, then dimmed. Below, the townsfolk staggered. A few fell to their knees. Their blank faces showed the first flickers of confusion, of pain. The spell was broken. Alex felt the ledge give way. He had no time to feel triumph, only a fleeting, quiet satisfaction. The massive piece of quartz sheared away from the wall, and he fell with it. The world became a whirl of gray stone and screaming air. The last thing he heard was not the hum, but the sound of the shattering ledge hitting the quarry floor. A single explosive note of pure silence that consumed everything. The silence did not last. It was a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. The first sound to return was a low, pained groan from the earth itself, a settling of vast, fractured weights. Then, a chorus of smaller human sounds, whimpers, confused cries, the raw, ragged sound of people waking from a long, terrible dream. Alex was not dead. He lay on a bed of sharp, broken shale, cushioned by the collapse of the smaller rocks and the body of the ledge itself, which had shattered into a million glittering pieces around him. Every part of him was a symphony of pain. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his head spinning, and looked out at the quarry. The great stone formation in the center was dark. The pulsing light was gone. The hum was gone, replaced by a ringing in his ears that felt like a ghost of the sound. The people of Stillwater were no longer a unified choir. They were a collection of lost, broken individuals, clutching their heads or staring at their own hands as if seeing them for the first time. The crystalline growths on their bodies had stopped their advance, and some of the smaller patches were already flaking away like dry scabs. The old librarian was on her knees, her glossy black eyes now clouded and milky. She was weeping, thin, dusty tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. He had done it. He had broken the song. He tried to stand, but his leg gave way with a searing jolt of pain. He looked down and saw his ankle was bent at a wrong, sickening angle. He dragged himself backward, away from the center of the quarry, using his hands and one good leg. He had to get out. He had to get away before the thing, whatever it was, found a new way to sing. A shadow fell over him. He looked up, expecting to see one of the townsfolk. Their blankness returned. It was not. It was a man he did not recognize. His face gaunt, but his eyes clear and sharp with an intelligence that was entirely human. He wore the tattered remains of a sheriff's deputy's uniform. "Can you walk?" the man asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Alex shook his head, unable to form words. The deputy nodded, his expression grim. He knelt, and with a surprising strength, hauled Alex to his feet, taking most of his weight onto his own shoulders. "Lean on me. We don't have much time." They moved in a slow, limping shuffle towards the path. Around them, the people of Stillwater were beginning to stir, to look at each other with dawning horror and recognition. The spell was broken, but the damage remained. The quarry was a tomb of their old lives. How? Alex managed to croak out as they reached the tree line. "The crack," the deputy said, his breath labored. "You found the flaw." The song wasn't perfect. It never was. It just overwhelmed us. I fought it for a long time. Longer than most. But you screamed back. They did not stop in the town. They moved through the silent, empty streets, past the houses with their dark, open doors. The deputy half-carried Alex past his own abandoned car and towards a rusted pickup truck hidden behind a collapsed shed. He helped Alex into the passenger seat, then got in and started the engine. It coughed and sputtered, but it turned over. As they drove down the winding gravel road, away from Stillwater, Alex watched the rearview mirror. The town receded, a gray smudge in the green of the mountains. He had broken the song here in this one place. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep into his broken bones, that this was not over. The quarry was one instrument. The sickness was not confined to that forgotten valley. The world was full of quiet, lonely places where a new song could begin. And he was now the one who knew how to listen for the dissonance. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet of the truck cab, he could still feel it. A faint, persistent vibration at the edge of his hearing, waiting for its next note. Story 2. The typewriter key clicks, a soft, final sound in the quiet of the room. My finger lifts. The key clicks again, the same soft, final sound. It is the only punctuation in the long, hollow hour. Gah, click, lift, click, dim, key. I watch my hand as if it belongs to someone else, a pale, spidery thing performing its solitary, meaningless ritual against the black lacquer of the machine. It has been doing this for what feels like days, or perhaps only for a single, stretched thin minute. The paper remains blank, a field of untouched snow beneath the harsh glare of the gooseneck lamp. The key is the letter A-T. Click. Lift. Dot. Click. Pot. A tiny, metallic heartbeat in a stillborn world. This is my sanctuary, my cell. The third-floor study of our old Victorian house on Hemlock Lane, a place Harmony calls my crow's nest. From here, I can see the town of Oakhaven sleeping below, a quilt of darkened rooftops and the occasional lonely streetlight. The air smells of dust, of aging paper, of my own slow decay. I am Abel Griffin, a novelist of some minor, fading renown, and I am utterly, completely empty. The clicking stops. My hand falls to the desk. The silence that rushes in is thicker, more profound. It has a weight, a texture, like wool packed into my ears. This is the curse of the man who has told all his stories. There's nothing left in the well but silt and the faint coppery taste of fear. Harmony believes in me. She brings me tea. Her footsteps on the stairs a gentle promise of normalcy. She will set the cup down beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder, a warm, living weight that feels like an accusation. "It will come, Mabel," she whispers, her voice a balm I cannot absorb. "The words will come back." I nod. I pat her hand. But I do not look at her. I cannot bear the faith in her eyes, a light that illuminates only my own hollow core. She is the anchor to this world, to a life of paying bills and tending gardens, and making love in the quiet dark. A life that feels like a story someone else is telling. The story I need to tell is a different kind of story. It is the one that has been whispering to me from the edges of sleep, from the static between radio stations. It is about a man named Cale. He is not a good man. He is the sharp, shattered piece of glass I carry inside me, the one that cuts when I turn too quickly. In my notes, in the few fragments I've managed to scrawl in my personal journal, Cale is a creature of impulse and iron. He does what he wants. He takes what he desires. He is the perfect, unflinching ID, a walking razor blade. He is everything I'm not, and he is the only thing that feels real to me anymore. The first omen was not a sound or a sight, but a smell. I came into the study one morning to find the scent of ozone and cold, damp stone hanging in the air. A scent that had no place in this warm, dry house. My notes were disturbed. A page describing Cale's hands, long-fingered, strong, with knuckles like river stones, was lying on the floor, though I was certain I had left the journal closed. A single sentence was underlined, not in my own hand, but in a sharp, angular script that seemed to gouge the paper. "The world is a soft thing, and I have hard hands." I told myself I had done it in a fugue state, a writer's trance. I told Harmony the furnace was acting up, explaining the strange chill. She believed me. She always believes me. Then the dreams began. Vivid, suffocating things. I was not Abel in these dreams. I was Cale. I felt the thrilling, muscular strain of moving through shadows, the cool night air on my face, the satisfying, gritty resistance of a lock giving way. I felt no fear, only a cold, clear purpose. I would wake with my heart hammering against my ribs, the taste of blood and adrenaline in my mouth. My own hands clenched into fists on the sheets. Harmony would sleep on beside me, peaceful and unaware, and I would lie there, a fraud in my own bed, trembling with a terror that was intimately twined with a dark and shameful thrill. The news reports started a week later. A burglary on the other side of town. A brutal, unnecessary one. The home of an elderly man named Mr. Henderson was torn apart. It wasn't a search for valuables, the police said. It was a violation. His prized silver pocket watch, a family heirloom, was missing. The way the officer, a serious, square-jawed man named Bradison, described the scene on the local news felt familiar, like a story I had already written. There was an artistry to the violence, Bradison said, his eyes narrow and troubled. A deliberateness. This wasn't a frantic junkie. This was someone who enjoyed the mess. I stood in the kitchen, frozen, a cup of coffee cooling in my hand. Harmony was chopping vegetables, her back to me. Artistry to the violence. The phrase echoed in the hollow of my skull. I had written those words. In a discarded draft, I had described Cale's work in exactly those terms. That night, I went to my journal. The page where I had first sketched Cale's character was gone. Torn out, not cut. The edges were ragged, furious. In its place, tucked into the binding, was Mr. Henderson's silver pocket watch. It was cold and heavy in my palm. I could smell the old man's faint, lemony cologne on it, and beneath that, the metallic scent of his fear. My breath hitched. The world tilted. This was not a fugue state. This was not my imagination. The thing I had conjured from the darkest ink of my soul had seeped out. It was here. It was learning. It was hunting. Bredesen came to the door 2 days later. He was polite, his hat in his hands, his gaze missing nothing. He was asking everyone in the neighborhood if they had seen anything unusual. His eyes scanned my study, lingering on the typewriter, the stacks of books, the general disarray of a writer's life. "You're Abel Griffin," he said, not quite a question. "The novelist." "That's right. Must be an interesting job," he said, his tone neutral. "Making people up, giving them lives. Must be hard, sometimes, to keep it all separate. The real from the made-up. Me, my throat was a desert. "It's just a job, officer." He nodded slowly. "This fellow we're looking for, he's got a particular style. Theatrical almost, like he's acting out a part." He fixed his eyes on me. They were the color of a winter sky, and just as cold. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Mr. Griffin? About creating a character so real he just walks off the page." The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the blood singing in my ears. I managed a weak, dismissive wave. "That's the stuff of bad movies, I'm afraid." He left, but his suspicion remained. A stain on the air. The investigation was circling, and Cale, my beautiful, terrible son, was just getting started. The second incident was worse. A young woman, a waitress at the diner downtown, was attacked in the parking lot after her late shift. She survived, but just barely. She told Bredesen her assailant moved with a strange, fluid grace. He never spoke a word. He had taken only one thing, the pen she used to take orders, chewed at the end. When Bredesen told me this, "A formality," he said, as I was one of the last customers she served that night, I felt the floor drop away. In my journal, I had written a line for Cale. He collected the small, intimate things, the artifacts of a life. They were more valuable than jewels. I went back to the journal that night, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. I had to find a way to stop this, to unwrite him, to take it all back. But the journal was no longer just my journal. His writing was everywhere now, a dark commentary scrawled in the margins. Next, to a passage where I described Abel's love for harmony, he had written a weakness, a chain. Next to a scene of violence, he had written more, deeper. And then I found the new pages. Pages I had not written. They were a chronicle of his nights. The feel of the cool grass under his feet. The sound of a window sliding up. The way the moonlight caught the terror in Mr. Henderson's eyes. The writing was electric, alive, pulsing with a vicious, joyful vitality my own work had always lacked. He was a better writer than I was. He was a better me. The horror was no longer that he was real. The horror was that he was more real than I was. My life with harmony, my days at the typewriter, they were the pale fiction. His world of sensation and impulse was the true one. The climax came on a night thick with the promise of rain. The air was heavy, suffocating. Harmony was in the living room, reading. I was in my study, staring at the blank page, the clicking of the ET key, the only sound. Click. Da. Lift. Yadum. Click. Dot. And then it stopped. A new sound replaced it. A slow, deliberate creak on the stair. Not Harmony's light step. This was a heavy, confident tread. It was the sound of ownership. My blood turned to ice. I knew who it was. I'd always known it would come to this. The Creator and his creation in the same room. The Word made flesh. The study door swung open silently. He stood there, framed in the doorway. He was me, and yet he was not. He had my face, my build, my thinning brown hair. But where my posture was slumped, defeated, his was coiled and predatory. Where my eyes were haunted and uncertain, his were flat, ancient, and held a glint of pure, amused malice. He wore dark, functional clothing, and he smelled of the night, of turned earth, and of something else, something metallic and sharp. He was the man from my dreams, the man from my pages, solid and undeniable. Abel, he said. His voice was my voice, but stripped of all doubt, all warmth. It was the sound of stone grinding against stone. I could not speak. I could only stare, a rabbit frozen before a snake. He smiled, a slow, cruel twisting of my own lips. You look surprised, after all the invitations you sent. He stepped into the room, his movements fluid and soundless. He ran a finger along the edge of my desk, leaving a faint trail in the dust. You called, and I came. Isn't that how it's supposed to work? What do you want? I whispered, the words tearing from my throat. What do you want? He said, his gaze drifting past me, toward the stairs, toward the sound of Harmony humming softly to herself in the living room below. I want to feel. I want to live. You wrote me to be free of all the rules, to do the things you only dream of in your darkest, most secret heart. No, I breathed. Not her. Never her. Why? He tilted his head, a gesture of genuine curiosity. She's the ultimate intimacy, is she not? The final barrier between you and the void. To break that, to truly know what that feels like. His eye gleamed. That is a story worth writing. He moved toward the door. I stood up, a sudden desperate strength flooding my limbs. This was not about writing anymore. This was not about stories. This was my wife. No, I said, my voice stronger now. He paused, looking back at me with faint amusement. You would stop me? You, who can barely lift a pen? I am your will, Abel. I am your strength. I am the hand that strikes because you are too cowardly to make a fist. He was right. I was a ghost, but even ghosts can love. I lunged at him. It was not a fight, not really. It was a leaf attacking a storm. He was impossibly strong. He caught my wrist with ease, his grip like iron, and slammed me back against the bookshelf. Books rained down around us. He backhanded me, a casual, dismissive blow that sent me sprawling to the floor, my vision exploding in stars of pain. I tasted blood. Pathetic, he murmured, standing over me. You created a god and you kneel in the dirt. He turned and started down the stairs. I heard Harmony's hum stop. Abel? Is everything all right? I pushed myself up, my head ringing. I saw it then, lying on the floor where it had fallen from the shelf. My old letter opener. A heavy, solid piece of brass shaped like a miniature dagger. A gift from Harmony, a lifetime ago. Cale's footsteps were on the living room floor. I heard Harmony's sharp intake of breath. Who are you? Get out of my house. I stumbled to the stairs, the letter opener cold and sure in my hand. The scene below was a frozen tableau. Harmony stood backed against the sofa, her face a mask of terror and confusion. Cale stood before her, his back to me. his posture one of relaxed dominance. "Don't you recognize me, Harmony?" he said, using my voice, layering it with a vile, possessive tenderness. "I'm the real one." I did not shout. I did not warn him. I simply descended the last few steps, closed the distance, and with all the weight of my broken life, all the love I had ever felt for the woman in this room, I drove the brass blade into his back, just below his left shoulder blade. He stiffened. A soft, surprised sigh escaped his lips. Not a cry of pain, but an acknowledgement. He turned his head, his eyes meeting mine over his shoulder. There was no anger in them, only a deep, profound understanding. Completion. "Finally," he whispered. Then he collapsed, folding onto the Persian rug like a marionette with its strings cut. Harmony was screaming, a high, thin sound that seemed to come from very far away. I knelt beside the body. My body. His body. The blood was seeping through his shirt, dark and real. I put a hand on his chest. There was no heartbeat. The flat, ancient light in his eyes was gone, replaced by the dull, clouded film of the dead. Bradison arrived with the sirens and the flashing lights. He found me there, covered in blood, holding my dying doppelganger. Harmony was hysterical, babbling about two Abels. The evidence was impossible, insane. A man who looked exactly like Abel Griffin. A man with no fingerprints, no dental records, no history, dead on the floor. A murder weapon with only my prints. My frantic, half-coherent story about a fictional character come to life. They took me in for questioning. For days, it was a circus. But there was no evidence I had killed anyone else. No evidence I had ever left my house on the nights of the crimes. The press had a field day. Novelists' twisted plot comes to life. The doppelganger defense. In the end, they called it temporary insanity. Self-defense against a home intruder. An intruder whose identity remained a mystery. They couldn't prove I was a murderer, and they couldn't explain the dead man in my living room. They had to let me go. Harmony stood by me. She tried to understand. She tried to believe that the man she loved was the one who had saved her, not the one who had threatened her. But a shadow had fallen between us, a chasm of unspoken horror. She would look at me sometimes, and I would see the question in her eyes, flickering like a dying ember. "Which one of you came back from the living room that night?" We could not stay in that house. We sold it, packed what little we could bear to keep, and moved across the country to a small, anonymous apartment in a city where it always seemed to be raining. We never spoke of Oakhaven, of Kale, of any of it. It sat between us at the dinner table, a silent, monstrous guest. The words never came back. The typewriter sits in a closet, wrapped in a sheet, a tomb for a dead god. I work a quiet data entry job now. I come home. I kiss my wife. I eat my dinner. I am a good man. I am a hollow man. Tonight, I am walking home from the bus stop. The rain has stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black, reflecting the neon signs of the city. My footsteps are the only sound. Click, dost, lift, die. Click, a soft, final sound. I feel a familiar ache in my right hand. I look down. My fingers are curled, as if around the handle of a brass letter opener. The knuckles are white. I make a conscious effort to relax them, and then I feel it. A presence. Not behind me, not beside me. Inside me. A cold, hard stone of certainty settling in the pit of my stomach. A thought that is not my own, rising like a bubble from a deep, black lake. You only killed the body, the thought whispers, in a voice of stone grinding on stone. The part that was weak, the part that could bleed. You could not kill the idea of me. I was never in the body, Abel. I was always in the mind. Your mind. I stop walking. I stand on the wet sidewalk, people brushing past me, their lives a blur of noise and light. The world feels soft, pliable. My hands feel very, very hard. I do not turn around. I do not look back. I simply start walking again, my pace steady, my face a placid mask. I walk away from the bus stop, away from the apartment, away from Harmony and the dinner waiting for me. I walk into the mouth of the gleaming, rain-soaked city, and I do not look back. There is no need. I know exactly what I have to do. I know exactly who I am now. The story is not over. It has only just found its true author. The first step was the hardest, the one that took me away from the warm lit windows of our apartment building. It felt like tearing a piece of my own skin. But with each subsequent step, the weight lessened, replaced by a cool, fluid certainty. The city's noise, which usually felt like an assault, now resolved into a symphony of opportunities. A car alarm was a cry of distress. A shouted argument was a spark of conflict. The glint of a broken bottle in a gutter was a potential tool. My mind was no longer a cluttered attic of anxieties and half-formed sentences. It was a clean, well-lit room. Kale's room. His memories were my memories, not as stories I had written, but as experiences I had lived. The gritty feel of a lockpick in my fingers. The specific, coppery taste of fear in the air of Mr. Henderson's house. The way a person's eyes widen a fraction of a second before they scream. I found myself in a part of the city I usually avoided, where the lights were fewer and the shadows clung to the brickwork like moss. A bar stood on the corner, its neon sign buzzing, casting a sickly green glow on the wet pavement. I pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. A few solitary figures hunched over their drinks. I did not sit at the bar. I chose a booth in the back, a position that allowed me to see the entire room. The door, the bartender, the man in the expensive-looking overcoat who had just walked in. He was my type. Not in the way Harmony was my type. He was Kale's type, Aura. He carried an aura of soft, unearned privilege. His hands were smooth. His watch was gold. He was talking loudly into his phone, annoyed about a business deal, completely unaware of the world around him. A soft thing. I sat in the dark and I watched him. I did not think about Abel. I did not think about the data entry job, or the dinner growing cold, or the way Harmony's face would crumple when she realized I wasn't coming home. Those thoughts were like faint, distant radio signals from a country I had once visited, but could no longer recall. They had no power here. The man finished his call and his third whiskey. He threw some money on the bar and stumbled out into the night. I gave him a 30-second lead. Then I followed. The alley he cut through was narrow and choked with overflowing dumpsters. His footsteps were loud and unsteady. Mine made no sound at all. He was fumbling for his keys when I came up behind him. He sensed me, started to turn, his mouth opening to form a question. He never got it out. My arm went around his throat, cutting off his air and his cry. He struggled, of course. He was stronger than he looked. But his struggle was frantic, uncoordinated. Mine was efficient, economical. It was the application of pressure, of leverage. It was a problem being solved. When he went limp, I lowered him to the ground. I did not check for a pulse. I knew. I took his wallet, his watch, the gold ring from his finger. Then I saw the pen, a sleek silver fountain pen, clipped to his inside pocket. An artifact. I took that too. I stood over him for a long moment, breathing in the night air, the scent of garbage, and his faint, expensive cologne. I felt nothing. No thrill, no guilt, no fear. Only a profound and utter stillness. This was not an act of passion or impulse. It was a statement, a declaration of existence. I walked away, leaving the soft thing in the alley. The city was no longer a place I lived in. It was a landscape. It was my page. And I had just written the first sentence of a new story. The true story. I slipped the silver pen into my pocket. It felt familiar there, like it had always belonged. I knew then that I would not be going home. Home was a fiction. This, the quiet, violent dark, was the only truth left. The rain began again, a fine, cold mist that beaded on the wool of the overcoat I had taken from the soft thing. It was a better fit than my old one. I walked without a destination, the stolen watch a heavy, comforting weight in my pocket. The pen was in my hand, my thumb tracing its smooth, cool barrel. It was a good pen. It would write a clean, sharp line. I found a small, shabby hotel that asked no questions and took cash. The room was exactly what I needed. A bed, a chair, a small desk, and a window overlooking a fire escape. I hung the overcoat in the closet and sat at the desk, placing the wallet, the watch, and the pen before me. These were not trophies. They were research. I opened the wallet. Credit cards, a driver's license, Michael Thorne, a photograph of a woman and 2 children. I studied their faces, their smiles. They were props in Michael Thorne's story, a story that was now over. I picked up the pen. I needed paper. There was none in the room. It didn't matter. The act was not in the writing, not anymore. The act was in the living. The pen was a tool for marking, for changing the state of things. Like a lock pick, like my hands. A quiet knock came at the door. Not the police. Not yet. This was softer, more tentative. I rose and looked through the peephole. A young woman stood there, her arms crossed against the cold, her face pale and anxious. She was the night clerk. I had seen her when I checked in, her eyes lingering on me with a mixture of fear and a strange, morbid curiosity. I opened the door just enough. She flinched back slightly. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir. It's just, we need a form of ID for the registry. You only paid in cash." Her voice was a nervous flutter. I looked at her. She was plain, with mousy brown hair and a small silver ring in her nose. An artifact. Her life was probably a small, sad story of long shifts and lonely nights. I could see the pulse beating rapidly in her throat. "I don't have any," I said, my voice calm. Kale's voice. Her eyes widened. "But you have to. It's the rules." I smiled. A slow, gentle smile that was not my own. "Rules are for the people in the story," I said softly, "not for the authors." I stepped back and opened the door wider. An invitation. She hesitated, her fear and her curiosity warring on her face. The curiosity won. She took a small, hesitant step into my room. Her eyes darted to the items on the desk. The wallet, the watch. That's a nice pen," she said, her voice barely a whisper, pointing a trembling finger. "It is," I agreed, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click. "It's going to write a very interesting story tonight." Her breath caught. She finally understood the kind of story she had just walked into. It was too late. The page was turned. The next sentence was already being written. Her eyes darted from the pen to my face, and the last of her curiosity evaporated, replaced by the pure primal understanding of prey. She took a stumbling step back, her shoulder hitting the door with a dull thud. There was nowhere to go. "Please," she whispered. "I won't say anything. I'll forget I ever saw you." "But I won't forget you," I said. And my voice was so reasonable, so calm. "You are a detail, a significant one. The first witness, the first one to truly see me here, in this new place." I took a step forward. She flinched, pressing herself flat against the wood. I could smell her now. The cheap floral shampoo in her hair and the sharp, acrid scent of her fear. It was more real than anything I had smelled in years. "You're not going to hurt me," she said, but it was a question, a plea to a universe that had suddenly stopped listening. "Hurt is a point of view," I said, repeating a line I had written for Kale in a forgotten chapter. "This is just a change of state." My hand moved, not with the frantic desperation of Abel's lunge in the old study, but with the smooth, practiced certainty I now owned. The silver pen was in my grip, no longer a writing instrument, but a stiletto. Her mouth opened, a black O of terror, but the sound that came out was choked, guttural, stifled by my other hand. The struggle was brief. It was like correcting a grammatical error, a swift, decisive strike to make the sentence read properly. When it was over, I lowered her to the thin, stained carpet. The whole event had been quiet, efficient, a private edit. I looked down at the scene, the body, the spilled purse, the silence. This was not like the alley. That had been a transaction, a transfer of property. This was different. This was creation. I had taken a living, breathing narrative and given it an ending. My ending. I worked quickly. The fire escape was as good as a front door. I wrapped her in the bedspread, a shroud of garish flowers, and carried her up to the roof. The city sprawled around me, a million lit windows, a million unwritten stories. I found a shadowed alcove behind a rusting ventilation unit and left her there, a secret tucked away in the city's attic. Back in the room, I cleaned. I used the small towel from the bathroom, wiping down every surface I could remember touching. I gathered my new possessions. The wallet, the watch, the pen, and put them in the pockets of the overcoat. I left the room key on the desk and slipped out the window onto the fire escape, pulling it shut behind me. The rain had softened to a drizzle. I climbed down into the alley, my footsteps silent on the wet iron. I merged with the flow of the city, just another shadow in the late night current. I felt a profound sense of peace. The gnawing emptiness that had haunted Abel was gone. In its place was a purpose, cold and clear and sharp as the pen in my pocket. I was not a man fleeing a crime. I was an artist, walking away from a finished piece. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like destiny, that it was only the first page of my new manuscript. The world was full of soft, pointless stories waiting for a better author. I was going to find them. I was going to give them the endings they deserved. The city was my library, and every person a book waiting to be read, judged, and closed. I walked for hours, the rhythm of my steps a metronome for my new thoughts. The initial raw impulse had been satisfied, and now a deeper, more patient intelligence was taking hold. Kale's intelligence. Recklessness led to capture. Art required patience. I found an all-night diner, a place of greasy light and tired faces. I took a booth in the corner, ordered coffee, and placed Michael Thorne's wallet on the table. I needed a new name, a new history. The data entry job had given me a certain skill set, a familiarity with systems, with the dry architecture of modern life. I could use that. Abel Griffin's life was a shackle I had broken. I would not be found by his mistakes. The waitress refilled my cup. She was older, with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Flo. She moved with the weary grace of someone who had seen everything and was no longer impressed. She was a background character. Safe. Long night? She asked, the question automatic, devoid of real curiosity. A new beginning, I replied, and gave her a smile that was neither warm nor cold, but simply a fact. She nodded as if that made perfect sense and moved on. I sipped the bitter coffee. It was perfect. This was the texture of reality, stripped of sentiment. The clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill, the low murmur of conversations that led nowhere. This was the world as it was, not as Abel had desperately wished it to be. When the sky began to lighten to a dull gray, I left cash on the table and walked out. I found a branch of a large bank and used Michael Thorne's ID and a practiced signature to empty his accounts. The teller, a young man with a meticulously knotted tie, didn't blink. He saw the gold watch, the quality of the overcoat, and processed the transaction without question. People see what they expect to see. I was learning to control those expectations. With a substantial amount of cash, I went shopping. I bought a simple, durable backpack, a change of clothes from a thrift store, nothing memorable, and a cheap, prepaid phone. Then I visited a library, using their public computers to delve into the quiet digital rivers where identities are bought and sold. Abel Griffin was a ghost in the machine now, a man who had vanished after a traumatic event. The police were not looking for him. They had closed the book. By the afternoon, I had the digital footprints of several promising candidates, men who had faded from the system, who would not be immediately missed. I chose one, Leo Jansen. He died in a car accident in another state 2 years ago, but the bureaucratic wheels had ground slowly. His social security number was still active, his credit file dormant. He was a blank page. I committed the details to memory. I did not write them down. The pen was for other things. I left the library, the new identity settling over me like a second skin. Leo Jansen. It had a good, solid, unremarkable sound. My next stop was a small, independent hardware store. I bought a set of fine-grade metal files, a small vise, and a butane torch. I took them to a different, even more transient hotel room. There, I carefully removed the engraved initials from the gold watch. I used the files to alter the serial numbers on the back, then applied a gentle heat with the torch to age the fresh metal. It was meticulous work, satisfying. I was not just taking things. I was improving them, refining them, removing their pasts as I had removed my own. As I worked, my mind was not on the watch or the money or even the body on the roof. It was on the structure of things. The police would find the clerk. They would find Michael Thorne. They would see 2 separate, senseless crimes. A mugging gone wrong. A random attack. They would look for connections in the visible world, in the realm of forensics and motives. They would not look for the author. They would not think to connect the dots because, to them, the dots were in different pictures. I finished with the wash. It was now anonymous, valuable only for its weight and its function. I packed my new tools and my new possessions into the backpack. I looked around the empty room. It had served its purpose. I walked out into the evening. Leo Jansen now, a man with a quiet life and no history. I felt the weight of the silver pen in my pocket. It was my only concession to sentiment, a token from my first night of true freedom, a reminder that every story, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, can be rewritten. I knew I would use it again. The city was vast, and it was full of bad prose. I had a lifetime of edits ahead of me. The bus station was a cathedral of transients, filled with the smell of diesel and disinfectant. I bought a ticket for the next city down the coast, a place of no significance, paying in cash. Leo Jansen's name felt comfortable on my tongue, a low-profile vehicle for my new self. I kept my head down, my posture unassuming, just another man moving from one point to another. No one saw me. I was a paragraph in a book no one was reading. I took a seat by a grimy window, the backpack on my lap. A family argued nearby, their voices a tangled knot of stress and weariness. A young man slept with his mouth open, his head lolling against the glass. I observed them all, not with Abel's anxious judgment or Cale's predatory focus, but with a writer's eye for character and detail. They were possibilities, potential subplots. The bus rumbled to life and pulled out of the terminal, merging into the river of Talites. The city receded behind us, a glittering scar on the horizon. I felt no nostalgia, no sense of loss. It was a location I was finished with. The narrative had moved on. The man next to me, the one who had been sleeping, stirred. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and then began patting his pockets, a slow, dawning panic on his face. He stood up, checking the seat, then the overhead bin, his movements becoming more frantic. "My wallet," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone. "It's gone." I watched him, my expression one of mild, detached concern. It was not in my backpack. I had no need for his meager story. But his distress was a ripple in the atmosphere of the bus, a small, unscripted event. He appealed to the driver, his voice cracking. There were murmurs of sympathy, offers of spare change that he refused with a shaking head. He returned to his seat, defeated, and put his head in his hands. The bus drove on through the deepening night. His little drama was over, a minor, tragic scene. I looked out the window at my own reflection superimposed on the dark landscape. I saw a calm face, a man at peace. The chaos of others was just background noise now, the static from which I would pluck my next clear, decisive sentence. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The next chapter was already beginning to form. The man's soft, hiccuping sobs eventually subsided into silence. He stared blankly at the seat in front of him. A man whose story had just been irrevocably altered by a single, careless event. I understood the feeling. The difference was, I was now the one administering the alterations, not suffering them. Hours later, the bus hissed to a stop at a depot in a city that was all concrete and neon. I disembarked, the night air cool and industrial. I needed a place, not just a room. Somewhere to establish Leo Jansen, to let his roots, however shallow, take hold. I found a weekly rental apartment above a laundromat. The landlord, a man with a permanent squint and grease under his fingernails, took my cash for the first week without a second glance at the ID I flashed. Leo Jansen was now a tenant. The apartment was a single room with a kitchenette, but it had a door that locked from the inside. That was what mattered. I placed the backpack on the small table. The contents were my only possessions. The watch, the pen, the money. I lined them up. Tools of the trade. For the next few days, I was a ghost. I bought groceries. I walked the streets, learning the rhythms of this new place. I was mapping the territory, not for escape routes, but for material. I saw a businessman screaming into his phone, his face purple with rage. I saw a woman meticulously wiping down a park bench before sitting, her movements tight with obsessive fear. I saw a young couple, their hands intertwined, their future a bright, naive bubble around them. So many stories, all begging for a stronger hand, a more definitive voice. The pen felt heavy in my pocket. It was time. I chose the businessman. His name, I learned from a discarded receipt he failed to properly shred, was Robert Harris. He frequented a bar called the Gilded Cage, where he would drink 3 martinis and insult the bartender in a voice he thought was quiet. He was a bitter, angry man. His story was a repetitive, grating loop. It needed a conclusion. I followed him one night, my footsteps a silent echo of his stumbling ones. He took a shortcut through a deserted parking garage, his keys already in his hand, jangling with a false confidence. The air was thick with the smell of oil and concrete. He was fumbling with his car door when I approached. "Lost?" I asked, my voice calm, neutral. He turned, his face a mask of irritation. "Do I look lost? Piss off." He never saw the pen. It was a single, precise motion, a period placed at the end of a run-on sentence. He made a small, gurgling sound, more surprise than pain, and slumped against his car. I caught him, easing him to the ground. I took his wallet, not for the money, but for the driver's license, a record, a page for my archives. I left the keys in his hand, the door still locked. I walked away, the silence of the garage swallowing my exit. Back in my apartment, I added Robert Harris' license to the small growing collection in a sealed envelope, tucked inside the lining of my backpack. I cleaned the pen meticulously, the silver gleaming under the bare bulb. There was no excitement, no pounding heart, only the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman. The world was being edited, one bad character at a time, and I had all of the time in the world. The following morning, I bought a local newspaper from a vending machine outside the laundromat. The story was on page 4. Local businessman found dead in apparent robbery. The police were quoted, describing it as a tragic, random act of violence. They had no leads. I folded the paper and left it on a bench. It was already outdated. The real story was walking away. A man named Leo Jansen, on his way to buy a fresh loaf of bread. The bread was a detail. Leo Jansen would need to eat. He would need to establish patterns. He found a small cafe he liked, with a window seat that allowed him to observe the street. He ordered black coffee and a pastry. He ate slowly, methodically. He was building a life, a character with habits and preferences. This was the groundwork. A believable character can get away with anything. Days turned into a week. I applied for a job using Leo Jansen's social security number. It was a data entry position in a small, cluttered office, the kind of place where no one looked at you twice. The work was monotonous. A river of meaningless numbers. I was perfect for it. My focus was absolute. My output flawless. My coworkers were shadows. Their conversations a dull murmur about television shows and weekend plans. They invited Leo to join for drinks once. I declined with a polite, shy smile. Leo was a loner. It was better that way. At night, I wrote, not with a pen, but in a cheap notebook with a ballpoint. I wrote down observations. The woman with the nervous hands who worked at the library. The security guard who always took the same break at the same time, leaning against the same wall. I was not planning. I was researching. Understanding the supporting cast before I decided which character arc needed to be severed. The pen remained in my pocket. A cool, patient weight. It was not a tool for impulse. It was a surgical instrument. I waited for the right moment, the right narrative imbalance. It came on a rainy Thursday. I saw a man in the park, berating a young woman, his voice a venomous snarl. She was crying, trying to shield a small dog from his anger. People looked away, uncomfortable. They saw a private argument. I saw a story of cruelty that had overstayed its welcome. I followed them at a distance. They lived in a rundown apartment building not far from my own. I noted the address. I learned his schedule. His name was David. He worked nights at a warehouse. She stayed home. I watched him leave the next evening, his shoulders hunched against the rain. I gave him an hour to get to work. Then I climbed the fire escape. The window to their apartment was unlocked. The woman was inside, sitting on a shabby sofa, the small dog in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth to scream, but I was already across the room, my hand gentle but firm over her lips. "Shh," I whispered, Kale's voice a soft, hypnotic murmur. "I'm not here for you. I'm here to correct a mistake." Her body was rigid with terror. The dog whined. I looked into her eyes, and I saw the years of fear, the constant erosion of her spirit. I was not a monster to her in that moment. I was an answer to a prayer she had been too afraid to utter. "I'm going to leave now," I said slowly, clearly. "When he comes home, you will be gone. You will take your dog and you will go to the bus station and you will leave this city. Do you understand?" She nodded. a frantic, jerky motion. "If you ever speak of this to anyone, I will know," I said. It was a lie, but a necessary one. A story needed a consequence to ensure its proper telling. "And I will find you." I released her and stepped back. She didn't move, just stared at me, her chest heaving. I turned and left the way I had come, descending the fire escape into the welcoming darkness. I did not look back. I had given her a new beginning. It was more than anyone had ever given Abel Griffin. I went home to my apartment. I did not wait for David to return. I did not need to see the final act. I had written his ending. When he came home to an empty apartment, his narrative of control would shatter. The police would assume she had finally left him. They would be right, but for the wrong reasons. It was a clean edit, an elegant one. I sat at my small table and opened the notebook. I drew a single neat line through David's name. Then I looked out the window at the city, at the 1,000 glittering lights, each one a story waiting for its final draft. The pen felt light in my hand, eager. There was so much work to do.